The harbor at dusk. The harbor of Stellamar had always been a place where the world seemed to pause and take a breath. As the sun descended beyond the western cliffs, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the fishing boats returned with their daily catch, their hulls creaking with the comfortable exhaustion of honest work. The water reflected the changing colors above, rippling gently as if the sea itself was settling down for the evening, pulling a blanket of twilight across its vast shoulders. Captain Mira Chen stood at the edge of the longest pier, her weather-worn hands resting on the salt-stained railing. She had sailed these waters for 30 years, knew every current and hidden rock, every seasonal change in the wind's temperament. Her boat, the Stella Noctis, bobbed peacefully in its mooring, its white sails furled in tide, waiting patiently for the next voyage like a loyal companion who never questioned where they might go next. At 53, Mira had the kind of face that spoke of days spent squinting at horizons and nights under open skies. Her dark hair, now threaded with silver, was pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. Her eyes, the color of deep water, held a perpetual look of quiet contemplation, as if she were always seeing something just beyond what others could perceive. The evening air carried the familiar sense of salt and seaweed, mixed with the warm aroma of bread baking in the bakery 2 streets back from the waterfront. Somewhere, a bell chimed the hour 6 times, slow and resonant, each tone floating across the harbor like a benediction. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, as if time itself moved more slowly here in Stellamar, as if the clocks understood that some things shouldn't be rushed. "Another day ends," said a voice beside her. Mira turned to see old Petros, the harbor master, approaching with his characteristic shuffling gait. He was a man who seemed to have been old forever, his face mapped with wrinkles that told stories of laughter and storms in equal measure. He carried a steaming cup of tea in each hand, and offered one to Mira without being asked. "Another day ends," Mira agreed, accepting the cup and wrapping her fingers around its warmth. The tea was chamomile and mint, Petros's own blend, sweet and soothing. "But you're not thinking about the day that's passed," Petros observed, settling himself against the railing with a satisfied grunt. "You're thinking about the night ahead." Mira smiled slightly. Petros had known her since she was a girl, since the first time she'd stepped aboard a boat and felt the deck move beneath her feet like a living thing. He understood her in ways that required no explanation. "The stars are bright tonight," she said simply, looking up at the sky where the first points of light were beginning to appear. Venus hung low on the horizon, a brilliant beacon. Above it, the faintest wisps of the Milky Way were starting to show themselves, like shy creatures emerging from hiding. "They're always bright for those who look," Petros replied. "But you don't just look, do you, Mira? You see." It was true. For as long as Mira could remember, she had felt a connection to the night sky that went beyond simple navigation. While other sailors used the stars as tools, as fixed points to plot their courses, Mira experienced them as something more, as living presences, as ancient storytellers, as companions on the eternal journey through darkness. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "about mapping them." Petros raised his bushy eyebrows. "They've been mapped already, haven't they? Every constellation, every notable star. There are charts going back thousands of years." "Not those kinds of maps," Mira said, and she paused, trying to articulate something she'd only felt, never fully formed into words. "Maps of what they mean. Of the stories they tell. Of the way they make us feel when we look up at them on a clear night, so far from shore that we can't see any lights but theirs." The old harbor master was quiet for a long moment, sipping his tea thoughtfully. A seagull called somewhere in the gathering dusk, its cry echoing across the water. The first lighthouse beam swept across the harbor mouth, a rotating guardian against the rocks. "That's a different kind of journey," Petros said finally. "Not out across the water, but up into the infinite." "How does one sail there?" "I don't know yet," Mira admitted. "But I think it starts with paying attention. With really watching, night after night, and writing down not just what I see, but what I feel. What stories arise. What memories surface." "It sounds like a journey without an end," Petros said. "Perhaps that's the point," Mira replied. They stood together in comfortable silence as the darkness deepened around them. More stars appeared, one by one, then in clusters, then in vast sweeping rivers of light. The harbor settled into its nighttime rhythm, the gentle lap of water against pilings, the creak of boats straining against their moorings, the distant sound of music from the tavern where sailors gathered to share tales and laughter. Mira thought about her journal, which sat in her cabin aboard the Stella Noctis. She had been keeping it for years, but only recently had she begun to understand its true purpose. It was filled with observations of the sky, yes, but also with memories that arose when she looked at certain constellations, with feelings that seemed to emanate from particular stars, with stories that formed themselves unbidden as she sat alone on deck in the middle of the night, far from any shore. "Will you leave tomorrow?" Petros asked. "Yes," Mira said. "With the morning tide. I'll sail north, away from the coastal routes. I want darkness, real darkness, the kind you can only find far from any city lights. I want to see the stars the way ancient sailors saw them, before the world grew so bright that it forgot the night." "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know. As long as it takes." Petros nodded, understanding. "The Stella Noctis is sound." "Your provisions?" "Enough for 2 months, if I'm careful. But I'm not going so far that I can't return if needed. This isn't about distance. It's about stillness. About staying in one place long enough to really see." "Funny," Petros mused, "that a sailor would seek stillness." "We're always moving," Mira said, "but the sky is always still. Or it appears that way. But it's not really still at all, is it? Everything is moving, the earth, the stars, the galaxies. We're all sailing through space together, a great fleet moving through the cosmic dark." The thought seemed to please Petros. He finished his tea and smiled, his weathered face crinkling like old paper. "You see? You're already making your map. You're already finding the stories." Mira looked up at the sky again. Orion had fully risen now, standing proud above the eastern horizon with his belt of 3 bright stars and his sword hanging below. She had seen Orion 10,000 times, had used those stars to navigate countless nights, but tonight she looked at them differently. Tonight, she tried to imagine what story they might tell if she listened carefully enough, if she approached them not as a navigator but as a student, humble and patient and open. "Come," Petros said, stirring from his place at the railing. "Have dinner with me and my wife. One last meal on solid ground before you embark on your strange voyage. She's made fish stew, and there's fresh bread from the bakery." Mira hesitated, then nodded. The stars would wait. They had been waiting for billions of years, they could wait a few hours more. And there was wisdom in Petros's invitation, in the understanding that even the most solitary journey begins with connection, with the warmth of human company, with the reminder that we are not alone even when we seek solitude. They walked together back along the pier, their footsteps hollow on the worn wooden planks. The harbor lanterns had been lit, casting pools of golden light that danced on the dark water. Somewhere a dog barked, and somewhere else a mother called her children in for the night. The ordinary sounds of evening in a small coastal town, the sounds that had accompanied countless generations as they settled into darkness, as they prepared for sleep, as they surrendered to the ancient rhythms that governed all living things. Mira glanced back once at the Stella Noctis, and in her mind she was already aboard, already feeling the gentle rock of the deck beneath her feet, already looking up at an infinity of stars. Tomorrow she would begin in earnest. Tomorrow she would set sail not toward any destination marked on a conventional chart, but toward something that had no coordinates, no fixed position, no guarantee of arrival. She was going to map the unmappable. She was going to chart the human heart's response to the eternal night sky. She was going to become, in her own quiet way, a cartographer of wonder. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and magnificent, as they had for eons before and would for eons after. But perhaps, Mira thought, they were not entirely indifferent. Perhaps they had been waiting all along for someone to really see them, to really listen, to undertake the patient work of translation between their cold light and human longing. In Petros's warm kitchen, with the smell of fish stew and bread and the sound of his wife's laughter, Mira felt the last threads of doubt fall away. This was right. This was necessary. This was the journey she had been preparing for all her life without knowing it. And tomorrow, with the morning tide, it would begin. Setting sail into darkness. The dawn came slowly to Stellamar, as if the sun itself was reluctant to disturb the peace of early morning. Mira woke before first light, as she always did, and lay in her narrow bunk listening to the water lap against the hull of the Stella Noctis. The boat rocked gently in its mooring, the motion as familiar to her as breathing, as comforting as a heartbeat. She rose and dressed in the practical clothes of a working sailor, canvas trousers, a cotton shirt, a thick wool sweater against the morning chill. Her movements were economical and practiced, each gesture performed thousands of times before in this same small space. There was meditation in such routine, she had long ago discovered. There was peace in knowing exactly where everything was, in the absence of surprise. On deck, the air was cool and fresh, carrying the salt-sharp clarity that only exists in the hour before sunrise. The harbor was still mostly asleep, only a few other boats showing signs of life, a lamp lit here, a figure moving there, the quiet industry of those who make their living from the sea. Mira performed her pre-departure ritual with careful attention. She checked the rigging, running her hands along the ropes, feeling for any wear or weakness. She inspected the sails, even though she had inspected them just the day before. She verified her provisions: water, dried fish, rice, beans, tea, fresh fruit that would last a week if she was careful. She checked her navigation instruments, compass, sextant, charts, even though where she was going, conventional navigation would serve a different purpose. Most importantly, she checked her journal. It sat in a waterproof box in her cabin, a leather-bound book with thick, unlined pages. She had already filled 3 such volumes over the years, and this was her 4th. She opened it to the first blank page and wrote the date at the top, October 15th. Below it, she wrote, "The mapping begins." By the time the sun broke the horizon, she was ready. She cast off her mooring lines with practiced ease, coiling them neatly on deck. The Stella Noctis drifted free, suddenly independent, suddenly belonging not to the land but to the water and everything that lay beyond. Mira raised the mainsail, and it filled with the morning breeze, snapping taut with a sound like a whip crack. The boat heeled slightly, finding its angle, and then they were moving, gliding out of the harbor with the gentle purpose of a bird taking flight. She stood at the tiller, one hand resting lightly on the worn wood, guiding them between the marker buoys and out past the breakwater where the protected harbor gave way to the open sea. She looked back once at Stellamore. The town was golden in the early light, the white buildings gleaming, the red tile roofs like scattered petals. She could see Petros on the harbor-master's dock, raising one hand in farewell. She raised her own hand in return, a gesture that meant both goodbye and a promise to return. Then she turned her face forward, toward the open water, toward the journey that awaited. The plan was simple in concept, if not in execution. She would sail north, away from the shipping lanes and coastal routes, into the less traveled waters where the darkness at night would be nearly absolute. She would find a place where the sea was calm and the sky was clear, and there she would drop anchor and spend her nights watching, recording, learning to see the stars not merely as navigation points but as storytellers. The first day passed in the familiar rhythm of sailing, adjusting the sails to catch the wind most efficiently, maintaining her course, eating simple meals that required no cooking, feeling the sun move across the sky from east to west. She saw other boats only occasionally, distant sails on the horizon, and each time they appeared, she felt a small twinge of relief when they passed on without hailing her. This journey required solitude. It required the kind of silence in which thoughts could form themselves without interruption. By late afternoon, she had left all sight of land behind. The world had become a simple thing, blue sky above, blue water below, and the Stella Noctis suspended between them like a small, determined thought. As the sun began its descent, Mira felt her attention shift. All day she had been a sailor, focused on wind and wave and heading. But now, as the light changed and softened, she began to transform into something else, an observer, a witness, a student of the coming night. She prepared a simple dinner, rice with dried fish and seaweed, green tea sweetened with honey. She ate slowly, sitting in the cockpit, watching the colors drain from the sky. There was an art to watching a sunset, she had learned. Most people looked at the sun itself, at the bright oranges and reds, the dramatic show. But the real beauty, the real magic, happened in the east, in the opposite direction, where the sky darkened through shades of blue and purple and indigo, where the first stars began their appearance. Venus was first, as always. The evening star, brilliant and unwavering. Mira watched it emerge from the deep blue, growing brighter as the sky darkened around it. She thought about the planet beneath that point of light, the crushing heat, the toxic atmosphere, the surface that no human would ever walk upon. So beautiful from here, so deadly up close. A reminder, perhaps, that distance lends enchantment. That some things are meant only to be admired, never possessed. She opened her journal and wrote, "Venus rises like a promise kept. The first light in the darkening sky. Steady, reliable, a beacon for all who look up. What promises do we make to the night? What do we vow when we look at the stars?" The stars came out like a tide coming in, slowly at first, then all at once. Within an hour of full darkness, the sky was dense with them. Mira extinguished all lights on the boat, letting her eyes adjust fully to the darkness. It took 20 minutes, perhaps longer, but gradually the sky revealed itself completely. She had seen dark skies before, of course. But there was something different about this night, about the intentionality of her watching. She wasn't glancing up between tasks, wasn't checking the stars for navigation. She was simply being with them, present and attentive, as one might sit with an old friend who has important things to say. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, so bright it cast faint shadows on the deck. Mira could see the dark lanes within it, the rifts and channels formed by interstellar dust. She could see the variations in color, the warm yellows and oranges of older stars, the cool blues and whites of younger ones. She could see depths within depths, layers upon layers, as if the sky were not a flat dome but an infinite space that her vision could penetrate if only she looked hard enough. She found Orion, now high in the eastern sky. She had always loved this constellation, had always felt a strange kinship with this figure of mythology, the hunter, forever pursuing, never catching, walking across the sky in eternal striving. She looked at the 3 stars of his belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, Mintaka, and tried to imagine the true nature of what she was seeing. These were not 3 stars at the same distance, she knew. They were scattered through space, separated by hundreds of light years, and only appeared aligned from Earth's particular vantage point. A cosmic coincidence, a trick of perspective that humans had used to create meaning, to tell stories, to navigate by. She wrote in her journal, Orion rises, belt first. 3 stars that form a pattern only because of where we stand. Is all meaning like this? A matter of perspective? The universe arranges itself according to our position, our needs, our hunger for pattern and story. But what if we stood elsewhere? What stories would we tell then? The night deepened. The boat rocked gently on the calm sea, the only sound the soft lapping of water against the hull and the occasional creak of the mast. Mira wrapped herself in a blanket and lay back against the cushions in the cockpit, looking straight up. From this position, the sky seemed to surround her completely, as if she were floating in space itself. She began to notice things she had never noticed before, despite years of night sailing. The way certain stars seemed to pulse faintly, varying in brightness with a rhythm she could almost feel. The way others appeared to have subtle colors, one tinged with red, another with blue, a third with a warm golden hue. The way the spaces between the stars were not empty at all, but filled with fainter stars, and between those stars even fainter ones still, an infinity of light diminishing into invisibility. And as she watched, something shifted in her perception. She stopped seeing individual stars and began to see the whole, the vast tapestry, the incomprehensible scale, the terrible and beautiful immensity of it all. For a moment, a brief disorienting moment, she felt the earth moving beneath her, felt the planet spinning through space, felt herself clinging to its surface as it hurtled around the sun, as the sun itself moved through the galaxy, as the galaxy sailed through the greater cosmos on a journey that had no beginning she could imagine and no end she could foresee. The feeling was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. She was so small. The boat was smaller still, a speck on the ocean, which was itself just a thin film of water on a small planet, which was itself just a mote of dust in the incomprehensible vastness above. And yet, she was here. She was conscious. She was able to see all of this, to understand it, to feel awe in its presence. That had to mean something. The universe had arranged itself in such a way that parts of it could become aware, could look back at the whole and marvel. Matter had organized itself into complexity, had learned to think, to feel, to wonder. Mira wrote, I am a way for the cosmos to know itself. We all are. Every person who looks up and wonders is the universe becoming conscious of its own existence. What a strange and marvelous thing. She stayed on deck for hours, watching, writing, allowing thoughts and feelings to arise without judgment. She noticed that certain stars seemed to evoke certain emotions, sadness from one, joy from another, a profound peace from a third. She knew this was projection, knew that the stars themselves were simply balls of fusing hydrogen billions of miles away, utterly indifferent to human feelings. But the feelings were real nonetheless. The stars, through their light, through their arrangement, through the stories humans had told about them for millennia, had become containers for emotion, repositories of meaning. Around midnight, she saw her first shooting star. It streaked across the sky near the constellation Cassiopeia, a brief bright line that existed for perhaps 2 seconds before vanishing. She made a wish, as she always did, though she would have been hard-pressed to say what she wished for. The wish itself was less important than the act of wishing, the acknowledgement that there were still things to hope for, still possibilities yet unrealized. She wrote, "A meteor burns in the atmosphere, a tiny piece of ancient rock meeting its end in a brief moment of brilliance. Is this not what we all do? Burn brightly for our brief moment, then return to darkness? And yet how beautiful that burning is. How necessary." Eventually, despite her intention to stay awake all night, drowsiness overcame her. She went below and climbed into her bunk, but even there, through the small porthole above her head, she could see stars. They were the last thing she saw before sleep claimed her, and they were the first thing she saw when she woke briefly in the hours before dawn. The journey had truly begun. The mapping was underway. And already, after just one night, Mira could feel something changing in her, some subtle shift in the way she perceived both the universe and herself. The stars were teaching her. She just had to keep watching, keep listening, keep her heart and mind open to whatever lessons they had to share. The constellation of memory. By the 5th day, Mira had found her perfect anchorage. It was a stretch of sea where 3 currents met in such a way that the water, while never completely still, remained calm enough that the Stella Noctis could rest at anchor without excessive motion. There was no land visible in any direction, nothing but the circular horizon where sea met sky in a perfect, unbroken line. During the day, the solitude was absolute. She saw no other boats, no planes overhead, no sign of human presence except for her own vessel. The sun crossed the sky, the water shifted through shades of blue and green and gray, seabirds occasionally appeared and disappeared, and time seemed to lose its usual urgency. Hours could pass while she did nothing but watch the light change on the water, or repair a piece of equipment that didn't truly need repairing, or simply sit in stillness. But the nights were when everything came alive. On this particular evening, the air was unusually clear and calm. The sunset had been spectacular, painting the western sky in layers of orange and pink and purple that reflected off the glassy sea. Mira had watched it all with the patience of someone who had learned that beauty reveals itself fully only to those willing to wait. Now, hours after sunset, she sat on deck with her journal open on her lap, a small red-filtered reading light clipped to its cover so she could write without destroying her night vision. The stars were so bright they seemed three-dimensional, as if she could reach out and touch them, as if they existed at different depths in the sky rather than on a flat plane. Tonight she was focusing on the constellation Lyra, home to the brilliant star Vega. It hung nearly overhead, a compact pattern that reminded her of a small harp, which was exactly what the ancient Greeks had seen in it. The lyre of Orpheus, the musician whose songs could charm even stones and trees, who had descended into the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice, only to lose her again through a moment of doubt, a backward glance. Mira looked at Vega, blue-white, dazzling, one of the brightest stars in the northern hemisphere. She knew its statistics. It was about 25 light-years away, twice the mass of the Sun, 40 times as luminous. It was a young star, less than 500 million years old, still in the prime of its fusion-burning life. In about 12,000 years, due to the precession of Earth's axis, it would become the North Star, replacing Polaris. Nothing was permanent, she thought. Even the pole star changed. As she gazed at Vega, a memory arose unbidden from somewhere deep in her mind. She was 7 years old, sitting on her grandmother's porch on a summer night. Her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident, was teaching her the constellations. The old woman's voice was soft and patient, her finger pointing up at the sky, tracing invisible lines between the stars. "That's Lyra," her grandmother had said. "The harp. And that bright star is Vega. It's one of the first stars you can see in the evening in summer. When I was your age, my mother taught me these same stars, and her mother taught her, going back and back through time. When you look at these stars, Mira, you're seeing the same light your ancestors saw. You're connected to all of them through the shared sky." Mira had been fascinated by this idea, that the past and present could meet in the light of stars, that she was part of an unbroken chain of watchers stretching back through generations. It was the first time she had felt that death might not be the absolute end it seemed, that something of those who came before might persist in the stories they told, in the knowledge they passed down, in the shared experience of looking up at the same eternal lights. She wrote in her journal, "Vega, the harp star. My grandmother showed me this star 36 years ago. She's been gone for 10 years now, but when I look at Vega, she's with me again. The stars are time machines. They bring the past into the present. They keep our dead alive." The memory of her grandmother opened other memories, a cascade of them, each connected to different stars and constellations. She remembered her first sailing trip, at age 16, with a crusty old captain who had taught her celestial navigation. He had made her stay on deck all night, plotting their position by the stars every hour, until she could recognize the important ones instantly and calculate a position without hesitation. "The stars don't lie," he had told her. "Instruments can fail, compasses can be wrong, but the stars are always honest. Trust them." She remembered night watches during her 20s, when she had worked on cargo ships, long hours alone at the helm while the rest of the crew slept below. Those solitary hours under the stars had been her real education, she realized now. Not the formal training or the license exams, but those hours of quiet observation, of keeping company with the night sky, of learning its rhythms and moods as intimately as she knew her own. She remembered teaching her own students, the young sailors who came to learn from her. She had tried to pass on not just the technical skills but the deeper wisdom, that navigation was more than mathematics, that the sea and sky demanded respect and humility, that there was meaning in the journey beyond just reaching a destination. All of these memories seemed to be contained somehow in the stars, as if the light falling on her face was carrying more than photons, as if it carried experiences, emotions, connections across time. She looked at the constellation as a whole again, seeing it fresh. The lyre, the harp, the instrument of Orpheus. What was that myth really about? A man who loved so deeply that he challenged death itself, who descended into the underworld armed only with music and hope. And he had succeeded, almost. Hades had been moved by his songs, had agreed to release Eurydice. All Orpheus had to do was walk back to the world of the living without looking back to see if she followed. But he had looked back. At the last moment, seized by doubt, by the fear that this was all a trick, that she wasn't really there behind him, he had turned around. And in turning, he had lost everything. What did it mean to look back? Mira wondered. Was it always a mistake? Or was there a time when looking back was necessary, when the past needed to be acknowledged and honored rather than left behind? She thought about her own life, the way she had spent so much of it looking forward, toward the next voyage, the next destination, the next challenge. She had rarely allowed herself to look back, to sit with memory, to acknowledge what she had lost along the way. Her parents, whose faces she could barely remember now. Her grandmother, who had been her true mother. Friends who had drifted away or died. Relationships that had ended because the sea always called her back, because she could never quite settle, never quite commit to anything that required staying in one place. Maybe looking back isn't the problem, she wrote. Maybe the problem is doubt. Orpheus looked back because he didn't trust Hades, didn't trust Eurydice, didn't trust himself. But what if we could look back with trust? With gratitude? What if we could turn to face the past without losing our way forward? A shooting star streaked across the sky, cutting through Lyra itself, and Mira felt a sudden surge of emotion, grief and joy mixed together, indistinguishable. She was crying, she realized, tears running down her face, and she didn't know if they were sad tears or happy ones. They were both. They were all the tears she had held back for years, decades, a lifetime of feeling that she had kept carefully locked away because sailors didn't cry, because showing emotion was showing weakness, because she had convinced herself that strength meant independence and independence meant being untouched by loss. But she had been touched. She had been marked and shaped by every loss, every goodbye, every choice to leave rather than stay. And the stars, somehow, had known this all along. They had been waiting for her to be ready to see it, to feel it, to let it wash through her without resistance. She let herself cry, sitting alone on the deck of her boat in the middle of the sea under an infinity of stars. She cried for her grandmother, for all the years they might have had together if cancer hadn't stolen her away. She cried for her parents, whom she had never really known, and for the child she had been who had to grow up too fast, who had to learn to be strong when she wanted to be weak, who had to find comfort in stars because people kept leaving. And then, gradually, the crying subsided, leaving behind a kind of clean emptiness, a peace. She looked up at Vega again, and it seemed brighter now, clearer, as if her tears had washed away some film that had been covering her vision. "Thank you," she whispered to the star, to the constellation, to the night itself. "Thank you for holding these memories. Thank you for giving them back to me." She spent the rest of the night writing, filling page after page with memories and reflections, with stories that arose from different stars and constellations. Cassiopeia reminded her of a proud teacher who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Ursa Major brought back childhood camping trips with her grandmother. The Pleiades evoked a group of friends from her sailing school days, 7 women who had sworn to stay in touch but who had scattered to different ports in different lives. Each memory was bittersweet, tinged with loss but also with gratitude, with the recognition that even what is gone has shaped what remains, that the past is not separate from the present but woven through it like threads in a tapestry. As dawn approached and the stars began to fade into the lightening sky, Mira felt fundamentally changed. She had come out here to map the stars, to understand their stories. But what she was really doing, she understood now, was mapping herself. The stars were a mirror, reflecting back her own experiences, her own losses and loves, her own journey through time. The mapping was turning inward as much as outward. The night sky was revealing not just its own nature but hers. And there were still so many stars to see, so many more nights to witness, so many more memories waiting to surface in the presence of that ancient light. The mathematics of wonder. By the second week, Mira had fallen into a rhythm that felt less like living and more like breathing, something automatic, essential, beyond conscious choice. She woke with the sun, spent her days in simple maintenance and observation, and surrendered her nights to the stars with the devotion of a monk at prayer. The weather had been cooperative, mostly clear with only occasional clouds drifting across the vast dome of sky. She had enough provisions still, though she was rationing carefully, making each meal count. She had caught 2 fish, which provided welcome fresh protein. The water in her tanks was holding steady. Everything on the practical level was fine. But something was shifting in her inner landscape. The longer she spent in solitude, the more the boundaries between self and sky seemed to blur. She would catch herself not remembering the last hour, realizing she had been sitting motionless, staring upward, her mind empty of thought but full of something else, awareness, perhaps. Pure presence. A state where the watcher and the watched merged into simple watching. Tonight she was studying the mathematics of the sky, and finding in numbers a different kind of poetry. She had her sextant out, though not for navigation. Instead, she was measuring angles between stars, calculating distances, contemplating the vast scales involved. The numbers themselves became a form of meditation, a way of touching the infinite with the finite mind. Vega, her companion star from nights before, was about 25 light-years distant. That meant the light she was seeing tonight had left the star 25 years ago, in the year 2001. When this light began its journey, Mira had been a young woman of 28, working on cargo ships, still learning her trade. That younger Mira would never have imagined this, alone on a boat in the middle of the ocean, mapping stars for no practical purpose at all. The light carried time within it. Every star she looked at was a glimpse into the past, some more distant than others. Deneb, in the constellation Cygnus, was over 2,600 light-years away. The light she saw from it tonight had begun its journey toward Earth when humans were still building the pyramids, when Rome was yet to be founded, when the entire span of recorded history was still ahead. She wrote these numbers in her journal, not just as facts but as doorways into wonder. Deneb, 2,600 light-years. The light I see tonight is older than Christianity, older than Buddha, older than written language. I am seeing the past. I am always seeing the past. There is no present in the stars, only history arriving at the speed of light. But then her mathematical mind took another turn. She calculated how far light travels in a single second, 186,282 miles. In 1 second, light could circle the Earth more than 7 times. It seemed impossibly fast, and yet it was achingly slow when measured against the distances between stars. The nearest star to Earth after the Sun was Proxima Centauri, just over 4 light-years away. 4 years for light to travel that distance. For any spacecraft humans had yet built, that journey would take tens of thousands of years. The stars that seemed close in the sky were separated by gulfs that made the deepest ocean trenches look like puddles. "We are so alone," she wrote. Each star island, separated from its neighbors by unimaginable distance. And yet we see them all together, sprinkled across the sky like neighbors in a village. Perspective collapses distance, creates the illusion of proximity. Are we comforted by this illusion or imprisoned by it? She thought about the Milky Way galaxy, the vast spiral of stars that contained Earth and the Sun. It was approximately 100,000 light-years across and contained somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. The sheer scale made her dizzy. If she tried to count to 1 billion, counting one number every second without stopping, it would take her nearly 32 years. And the Milky Way was just one galaxy among billions, perhaps trillions, in the observable universe. Each galaxy a vast city of stars, each separated from its neighbors by millions of light-years of mostly empty space. The numbers stopped meaning anything at that scale. They became abstract, impossible to hold in the human imagination. When the numbers get too big, they become a form of poetry, she wrote. We can't truly comprehend a billion of anything, let alone trillions. But we can feel something in the presence of such numbers, humility, perhaps. Awe. The sense that we are part of something so much larger than ourselves that our individual concerns shrink to nothing. And yet, she thought, individual concerns didn't shrink to nothing. Her grief for her grandmother was no less real because it existed in a universe of billions of stars. Her joy at watching the sunset was no less valid because the sun was an ordinary star among countless others. Meaning didn't depend on uniqueness. It didn't require the universe to be small enough to care about each individual. Perhaps that was the real lesson of the mathematics. Not that humans were insignificant, though measured against cosmic scales, they certainly were, but that significance didn't come from size or duration. It came from consciousness, from the ability to experience and understand and create meaning from raw sensory data. She looked up at the sky again, trying to see it fresh. Thousands of points of light, each one a massive sphere of fusing hydrogen millions or billions of miles away. And here she was, a tiny organism on a small planet, looking up and understanding what she was seeing. That act of understanding, of consciousness recognizing the vast processes that created the stars themselves, wasn't that significant? Wasn't that the universe achieving something remarkable? I am carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen, elements forged in the hearts of stars that exploded billions of years ago, she wrote. I am literally made of stardust, as the saying goes. But it's more than that. I am a way for the matter of dead stars to look back up at living stars and understand the connection. I close a loop, complete a circle. The universe examines itself through me. The thought was so large it seemed to expand her chest, to make breathing difficult for a moment. It was like the feeling of being on a high cliff or tall building, a vertiginous sense of one's own smallness combined with an exhilarating rush of perspective. She spent hours with her calculations, her measurements, her numbers. She charted angular distances between stars. She calculated how long it would take light to travel between them. She estimated stellar masses and luminosities using formulas half remembered from old textbooks. The mathematics became a kind of prayer, each equation an acknowledgement of order, of law, of the deep structure underlying all appearance. Around midnight, she set aside her sextant and her journal and simply lay back, looking up. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light composed of billions of individual stars too far away to see as separate points. She tried to imagine the structure of it, the vast spiral arms, the central bulge, the stars in their slow orbit around the galactic center, taking 250 million years to complete one revolution. The Sun had been around that galactic circuit only 20 times or so since its formation. Earth had made that journey an equal number of times, carrying life along with it, life that had started as simple chemistry and evolved into complexity, into consciousness, into Mira herself lying on a boat looking up. We are all ancient, she wrote in a sudden inspiration. Every atom in my body has existed for billions of years. They have been part of stars, part of nebulae, part of planets and asteroids and comets. They have drifted through space and fallen into gravity wells and been incorporated into living things before me. I am not young. I am older than the mountains, older than the ocean. I am a temporary arrangement of ancient matter, briefly self-aware. The idea was simultaneously humbling and empowering. If she was ancient matter, then she partook of that ancient dignity. She was part of the story that began with the Big Bang, part of the great unfolding of complexity from simplicity, of order from chaos, of consciousness from matter. A satellite passed overhead, a moving point of light among the fixed stars. It reminded her that she was still part of human civilization, still connected to the world of people and technology and communication. The satellite was probably beaming television signals or phone calls or internet data around the world, enabling billions of small human conversations and transactions. It was easy to forget, out here, that such a world existed. She thought about all those people, each one a conscious being like herself, each one looking at the same stars, when they bothered to look, each one making their own meaning, living their own story. 7 billion individual perspectives, 7 billion centers of experience, all existing simultaneously on this small planet. The mathematics of compassion, she wrote. If I matter, if my experience is real and important, then so is everyone else's. Billions of points of significance, each one absolute from within, each one relative from without. How do we hold both truths at once? How do we honor both the individual and the collective? She didn't have an answer. But asking the question felt important, felt like part of what she was supposed to be learning out here under the stars. The mapping she was doing wasn't just of the external sky but of the internal landscape where mathematics and meaning, fact and feeling, individual and universal met and mingled. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. And Mira, filled with numbers and wonder, finally surrendered to sleep, her mind still spinning with calculations that blurred into dreams, with equations that dissolved into poetry, with the vast scales of space and time that somehow made room for one small woman and one small boat beneath an infinite sky. The darkness between stars. The 16th night brought clouds. They rolled in from the west during the afternoon, great towers of cumulus building on the horizon, their tops brilliant white in the sunlight, their bottoms dark and threatening. Mira watched them approach with mixed feelings. She had been blessed with clear skies for most of her journey, and she knew that fortune couldn't last forever. Clouds were part of the sky's nature, as important as the stars themselves. By evening, the sky was completely overcast, a solid ceiling of gray that blotted out everything above. No stars, no moon, no visible celestial objects at all. The darkness, when it came, was absolute, thicker and more oppressive than any starlit night could ever be. Mira sat on deck in that darkness, wrapped in her warmest coat, and realized she felt disappointed. She had come to depend on the stars, to need them the way one needs food or water. Their absence left a hollow feeling, a kind of hunger that couldn't be satisfied. But as she sat there, a different kind of awareness began to emerge. She started to notice sounds she had been too distracted to hear on clear nights, the soft whoosh of wind across the water, the creak of the mast, the gentle percussion of waves against the hull. She noticed the smell of the ocean more acutely, the salt and brine and faint rot of living things. She noticed the feel of the air on her face, the texture of moisture, the slight chill that spoke of changing weather. The stars show us one thing, She wrote in her journal by the light of her red reading lamp, but darkness shows us another. Sometimes we need to lose sight in order to develop other senses. Sometimes the absence of light is its own teacher. She thought about the word dark and all its connotations: evil, ignorance, fear, death. Darkness had a bad reputation in human culture. We spoke of dark deeds, dark thoughts, dark times. We feared the dark, lit fires and lamps and electric lights to push it back, to create islands of illumination in the perpetual night. But darkness was the default state of the universe. Space was dark. The vast distances between stars were dark. Even matter itself was mostly darkness: the electron clouds around atoms, the space between nucleus and electron, all the emptiness that made up what appeared solid. We are addicted to light, Mira wrote, but we are made of darkness too. The spaces between our atoms mirror the spaces between stars. We are not solid things but patterns of energy mostly surrounded by nothing. To fear darkness is to fear our own nature. She extinguished even her small reading light and sat in the complete blackness. It was so dark she couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She could have been anywhere, in a cave, in the deepest ocean, in the void of space itself. The boat beneath her was only known through feel and sound, no longer through sight. At first, the darkness felt oppressive, almost claustrophobic despite being outdoors on the open ocean. Her mind conjured fears. What if something was out there in the dark? What if the boat was drifting toward rocks she couldn't see? What if she was no longer alone? But she sat with the fear, breathed through it, recognized it as an ancient survival instinct that had kept humans alive when darkness really did hide predators and dangers. Out here, there were no predators. There were no rocks. She was perfectly safe, held by the ocean as she had been held for weeks now. Gradually, the fear subsided, and in its place came something unexpected, a sense of peace, of being held by the darkness rather than threatened by it. The darkness was like a womb, she thought. It was the original state from which light emerged, the canvas on which light painted its temporary pictures. She remembered something she had read once, that the human eye can detect a single photon of light. If our eyes were just slightly more sensitive, we would see the thermal radiation from our own bodies and the world would never be truly dark. We would live in a permanent glow of infrared light, unable to experience true blackness. The fact that we could experience darkness, then, was a gift. It allowed contrast. It made light meaningful. Without darkness, there would be no stars, their light would be drowned out in the general brilliance. Without the darkness of night, there would be no sunrise, no moment of transition, no cycle of rest and activity. Darkness is not the opposite of light, she wrote, her pen moving across the page in the blind, trusting that she was writing in something like straight lines. It is the complement to light. It is the space in which light can exist and be seen. The silence in which sound has meaning. The emptiness that gives form to fullness. She thought about all the forms of darkness in her life, the dark times of grief and loss, the dark periods of uncertainty and doubt, the dark moments when she couldn't see her way forward. She had always tried to push through these quickly, to find the light again as fast as possible. But what if the darkness had its own value? What if those periods of not knowing, of not seeing, were necessary for growth? A seed grows in darkness underground before it pushes up into light. A baby develops in the darkness of the womb before being born into the visible world. Sight itself depends on the darkness of the pupil, the black hole in the center of the eye that lets light in. I have been afraid of my own dark places, Mira wrote. The grief I wouldn't fully feel, the anger I wouldn't express, the doubts I wouldn't acknowledge. I kept them in shadow, refused to look at them directly. But they were there all along, shaping me from within. What if I could welcome them the way I welcome this dark night? What if I could sit with them without fear, without the need to immediately fix or change or illuminate them? The night wore on. The clouds remained thick overhead. No break appeared in the darkness. And Mira sat with it all, practicing a kind of meditation she had never attempted before, the meditation of complete acceptance, of being with what is rather than wishing for what might be. She found herself thinking about the people she had left behind over the years, not with her usual quick dismissal of those memories but with gentle attention. The man she had almost married in her 30s, who had wanted her to give up sailing and settle down. She had left him without much explanation, convinced that her freedom was worth more than any relationship. But had it been? Had she been running toward something or away from something? The friends who had gradually stopped calling, stopped inviting, stopped trying to maintain connection with someone who was always leaving, always at sea. She had told herself she didn't need them, that she was self-sufficient. But sitting here in the dark, she could feel the ache of loneliness, the truth that humans are social creatures who need connection even when they convince themselves otherwise. Her own capacity for love, which she had kept locked away like treasure in a vault, afraid to spend it because spending meant risking loss. She had loved her grandmother fiercely, and when her grandmother died, the pain had been unbearable. She had decided, somewhere deep down, never to love like that again. Better to keep people at a distance, better to be friendly but not intimate, better to always have one foot already stepping toward the door. I have been living in fear, she wrote, tears coming now, invisible in the darkness but real nonetheless. Not fear of the ocean or the storms or the practical dangers of sailing. Fear of connection. Fear of being fully seen. Fear of loving and losing again. I thought I was brave, but I was just careful. I thought I was free, but I was just alone. The admission felt enormous, almost too large to contain. She cried silently in the darkness, the tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking. There was no one to see, no one to judge, no need to maintain the composed exterior she usually presented to the world. She could be completely authentic in this darkness, completely herself. And strangely, the crying felt like relief. Like something that had been held too tight for too long was finally being released. Like pressure equalizing, walls coming down, defenses no longer needed. After a long time, the crying subsided. She sat in the darkness, emptied out, quiet. And in that quietness, she heard something she had never heard before, the sound of her own breath, slow and steady, the most basic rhythm of life. She had been breathing all along, of course, but she had never really listened to it, never paid attention to the way her chest rose and fell, the way air entered and left her body in an endless cycle. I am alive, she wrote. Right now, in this moment, I am alive. That is enough. That is everything. The darkness no longer felt oppressive. It felt intimate, gentle, like a kind presence holding her while she processed difficult truths. She thought about the darkness between stars, the vast empty spaces that made up most of the universe. That darkness wasn't nothing. It was the fabric of space itself, the medium through which gravity and light moved, the stage on which all cosmic drama played out. And the darkness within her wasn't nothing either. It was the space from which thoughts and feelings emerged, the unknown depths from which creativity and insight arose, the mystery at the heart of consciousness that no amount of neuroscience could fully explain. I will befriend my darkness, she decided, speaking aloud into the night. I will stop fighting it, stop trying to fill it with constant light. I will learn to be comfortable in not knowing, in uncertainty, in the gaps between one thing and the next. The declaration felt like a vow, like a promise to herself that was as binding as any promise she had ever made. She stayed on deck until she was shivering with cold, until exhaustion overtook her. Then she went below, climbed into her bunk, and fell immediately into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that comes after a breakthrough, after something fundamental has shifted. When she woke, dawn was breaking. The clouds were beginning to break up, and through the gaps, she could see stars fading in the growing light. The darkness was giving way again today, as it always did, as it always would. But something had changed. She no longer saw darkness as the absence of light but as a presence in its own right, necessary, valuable, and worthy of respect. The mapping continued, but now it included not just the bright points of stars but the dark spaces between them, the emptiness that made the light visible, the silence that gave meaning to sound, the mystery that made knowledge precious. The storm and the stillness. On the 21st day, the weather turned. Mira had felt it coming for hours before it arrived, a heaviness in the air, a change in the quality of light, a tension that made the sea itself seem to hold its breath. By mid-afternoon, the barometer had dropped significantly, and the western horizon was stacked with dark clouds that rose like mountains into the stratosphere. She prepared the boat methodically, running through protocols she had practiced countless times over 3 decades of sailing. She checked all hatches, secured everything on deck, rigged storm lines, reefed the mainsail down to its smallest configuration. The Stella Noctis was a sturdy vessel, well-maintained, designed to handle rough weather. But storms at sea were always serious business, always demanded respect and preparation. By evening, the wind had picked up to 30 knots, and the seas were running at 8 to 10 feet, long rolling swells that lifted the boat and dropped it with increasingly violent motion. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavy, then torrential, reducing visibility to nearly nothing. Mira stood in the cockpit, tethered to the boat with a safety harness, wearing her foul-weather gear, soaked despite it. The wind howled through the rigging, creating an eerie symphony of tones and overtones. The waves crashed against the hull, sending spray high into the air. The boat pitched and rolled, and Mira moved with it, her body automatically compensating, her muscles' memory taking over. She felt no fear, not yet. She had been through storms before, some worse than this. She trusted her boat and her skills. But she felt something else, a profound respect for the power of nature, for the vast forces that were playing out around her, forces that would barely notice if her small vessel was destroyed. The storm intensified through the night. 40-knot winds, 15-foot seas, rain so heavy it was like sailing under a waterfall. Visibility was zero. She couldn't see beyond the bow of the boat, couldn't see anything but water and darkness and the occasional white flash of breaking waves. She steered by feel and by compass, keeping the boat positioned properly relative to the waves, preventing it from being rolled or swamped. Hours passed in a blur of physical effort and intense concentration. There was no room for thought, no space for philosophy or reflection. There was only the immediate present, only the next wave, only the constant small corrections and adjustments that kept the boat safe. Around midnight, something shifted. The storm didn't diminish, if anything, it seemed to reach a new level of intensity, with gusts hitting 50 knots and waves cresting at 20 feet. But something in Mira's perception changed. She stopped fighting the storm and started moving with it, becoming part of it rather than separate from it. She felt her body synchronize with the boat's motion, felt herself breathe in rhythm with the waves, felt a strange exhilaration rise up in her chest. This was why she sailed. This was what had called her to the sea in the first place, not the calm days, not the starry nights, but this. This test, this challenge, this pure unfiltered engagement with forces larger than herself. "I am alive," she shouted into the wind, her voice immediately torn away by the roar of the storm. I am here. The storm seemed to answer, sending a particularly large wave that crashed over the bow and swept the deck, tons of water that the boat pushed through with stubborn determination. Mira laughed, actually laughed, at the absurdity and beauty of it. Here she was, a small human on a small boat in the middle of the ocean in the middle of a storm, and she was laughing. The storm raged for 6 more hours. 6 hours of relentless wind and wave, of rain and spray, of muscles burning with effort and mind focused to a single point. And through it all, Mira felt intensely, vividly alive in a way she rarely experienced on calm days. Finally, as dawn approached, the storm began to break. The wind eased from 50 knots to 40 to 30. The seas remained high, but the waves began to lose their violent, breaking crests. The rain lightened to a drizzle, then stopped altogether. Mira allowed herself to relax slightly, to ease the death grip she'd had on the tiller. She was exhausted, soaked to the skin despite her gear, her muscles trembling with fatigue. But she was unhurt, and the Stella Noctis was intact, still faithfully carrying her across the sea. As the light grew, the clouds began to break up, and Mira saw something she had never seen before, the moment when the stars became visible through gaps in the breaking storm clouds. One moment there was only gray, and the next, a patch of clear sky appeared, and in it, stars. Not the familiar stars of a full night, but stars framed by dark clouds, stars that seemed impossibly bright against the backdrop of the storm's remnants. She watched as more gaps appeared, more patches of clear sky, until the western half of the sky was clear and full of stars while the eastern half remained cloudy. The contrast was stunning, light and dark, chaos and order, storm and stillness, all coexisting, all part of the same whole. This, she whispered, too tired to write in her journal, too moved to look away. This is it. She understood something in that moment that she couldn't quite put into words. It had to do with the storm and the stars, with darkness and light, with the way beauty and terror were intertwined, inseparable. The storm had been terrible and magnificent. The stars were peaceful and eternal. Both were true. Both were necessary. Life wasn't about choosing between the storm and the stillness, between the chaos and the order. It was about embracing both, understanding that they arose from the same source, that they defined each other, that without one the other would have no meaning. She thought about her own life, the way she had tried to maintain control, to avoid storms, to keep everything calm and manageable. But storms came anyway. Loss came, pain came, uncertainty came. And when they did, she had a choice, to resist them, to fight against them, to see them as interruptions of her peaceful navigation, or to recognize them as part of the journey, as necessary as the calm days, as instructive as the star-filled nights. I have been trying to map the stars, she thought, finally able to form coherent ideas again as exhaustion began to pull her towards sleep. But maybe I need to map the storms too. Maybe the complete picture includes both. She went below, peeled off her wet clothing, and collapsed into her bunk. She fell asleep immediately and slept for 10 hours straight, the deep dreamless sleep of complete physical exhaustion. When she woke, it was late afternoon. The sky was completely clear, washed clean by the storm. The sea had calmed to gentle swells. Everything sparkled in the slanting sunlight as if the world had been reborn. Mira went on deck and assessed the damage. A few minor issues, a torn line, a cracked plastic cover on the compass, a missing cockpit cushion swept overboard by the waves. But nothing serious, nothing that couldn't be easily repaired. The Stella Noctis had weathered the storm with grace. She made herself tea and sat in the cockpit, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the gentle motion of the boat, the peace that comes after struggle. She thought about writing in her journal, but for once, she didn't feel the need. The experience was complete in itself, needed no recording or analysis. It had been lived fully in the moment, and that was enough. As evening approached and the stars began to appear again, her old friends, her companions, her teachers, Mira felt a profound gratitude. Gratitude for the storm that had tested her and found her equal to it. Gratitude for the stillness that followed. Gratitude for the stars that returned night after night, patient and eternal. Gratitude for the life that flowed through her, consciousness experiencing itself, matter aware of matter. "Thank you," she said aloud to the darkening sky. "For all of it. The storm and the stars. The darkness and the light. The fear and the joy. Thank you for this life, exactly as it is." And the stars, as they had for billions of years, simply shone, neither caring nor uncaring, neither listening nor deaf, simply being what they were, distant suns, burning in the void, their light traveling across unfathomable distances to fall on the face of one small human who had learned, finally, to see them truly. The return journey. The decision to return came naturally, without drama or doubt. After 29 days at sea, watching stars, mapping wonder, diving deep into memory and meaning, Mira woke one morning and simply knew, it was time to go home. She couldn't have explained exactly why. She still had provisions, the weather was stable, and the stars continued their nightly display. But something had shifted. The journey felt complete, not in the sense of finished but in the sense of having accomplished what it set out to do, even though she hadn't known what that was when she began. She spent the morning preparing for the voyage back to Stellamore. She checked the rigging once more, plotted her course, calculated the time it would take, 3 to 4 days, depending on wind conditions. She organized her provisions, cleaned the cabin, made everything shipshape. But most importantly, she spent time with her journal, reading back through the entries she had made over the past month. It was like visiting an old friend, or perhaps meeting a new one. The person she had become through this experience was both familiar and strange. She read about her first nights watching the stars, the memories that arose, the tears shed over her grandmother. She read about the mathematics and wonder, the darkness between stars, the storm and its lessons. Each entry was a marker, a cairn left along a path she had traveled without knowing where it led. "I came out here to map the stars," she wrote on a fresh page. "But what I really did was map myself. The stars were mirrors, reflecting back my own depths. They showed me what I was afraid to see, my loneliness, my fear of connection, my grief I had never fully processed. And in showing me these things, they freed me from them. Or began to, at least. This is work that will continue for the rest of my life." She thought about what she would do when she returned. Would she go back to her old life, the solitary routine of occasional charters and long solo sails? Or would something change? She found herself imagining, for the first time in years, a different kind of life. Maybe she would take on an apprentice, someone to teach as she had been taught. Maybe she would reconnect with old friends, reach out to people she had let drift away. Maybe she would even, and this thought came with equal parts terror and excitement, allow herself to truly love again, to risk opening her heart despite knowing that all things end, all people leave, all light eventually fades. "The stars taught me that ending isn't failure," she wrote. "Stars die, but in dying they create the elements necessary for new life. My grandmother died, but her teaching lives on in me. Every connection I've ever made, even those that ended, shaped who I am. Nothing is wasted." Loss is part of the pattern, not a flaw in it. That afternoon, she raised anchor for the last time and set sail south toward Stellamore. The wind was fair, steady from the north, and the Stella Noctis moved easily through the calm seas, eager it seemed to return home after its long vigil. Mira sailed through the afternoon and into the evening, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, watching the familiar stars emerge one by one. She recognized each one now not just as a navigation point but as a companion, a teacher, a holder of memories and meaning. That night, her last night before reaching port, she didn't take out her journal. Instead, she simply lay on deck and looked up, allowing the experience to wash over her without trying to capture or analyze it. The stars were brilliant, the Milky Way a river of light, the vastness both humbling and comforting. She thought about all the people throughout history who had looked up at these same stars, ancient sailors navigating by them, philosophers pondering them, lovers making wishes upon them, children learning their names from parents and grandparents. She was part of that vast human chain, that unbroken lineage of wonder stretching back to the first humans who looked up and asked what those lights were, where they came from, what they meant. We are all star mappers, she thought. Every person who looks up and wonders is doing the work. We're all trying to understand our place in this vast cosmos, trying to make meaning from matter, trying to find connection in the incomprehensible distances between things. She fell asleep on deck that night, wrapped in blankets, the gentle motion of the boat rocking her like a child. She dreamed of stars, not as distant suns but as beings, conscious and aware, dreaming their own dreams of planets and life and the strange creatures who evolved to look back at them. When she woke, dawn was breaking, and in the distance, she could see the faint outline of land. Stellamore was still many miles away, but its presence on the horizon filled her with unexpected emotion. She was going home. After weeks of solitude and vastness, she was returning to the human world of ports and people, of familiar faces and daily routines. She found herself both eager and reluctant. Eager to see Petros again, to taste fresh bread from the bakery, to walk on solid ground. But reluctant to leave the simplicity of star and sea, the direct experience of being alive on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Both are necessary, she reminded herself. Solitude and community. Wilderness and civilization. The voyage out and the voyage home. The work is to hold both, to honor both, to move between them with grace. By late afternoon, the harbor of Stellamore appeared in full. Mira could see the familiar pier, the lighthouse, the white buildings climbing the hillside. She could see boats in their moorings, people moving on the docks. It looked impossibly busy after weeks of solitude, almost overwhelming in its complexity and activity. She sailed into the harbor carefully, mindful of other vessels, following the markers she knew so well. As she approached her usual mooring, she saw Petros standing on the dock, waiting. He must have spotted the Stella Noctis from the harbor master's tower. He raised his hand in greeting, and Mira felt tears spring to her eyes. She had been alone so long that this simple gesture of welcome moved her beyond words. She brought the boat alongside the dock with practiced ease, and Petros caught the mooring lines, tying them off with expert knots. For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Mira saw in his eyes that he understood. He knew she had been on a different kind of journey, that she was returning changed. "Welcome home, Captain," he said simply. "It's good to be back," Mira replied, and meant it. She spent the next hour securing the boat, furling sails, stowing equipment, making everything safe and proper. Petros helped without being asked, the two of them working together in companionable silence. When everything was done, they walked together back along the pier toward the town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar colors, amber and rose and purple. The evening star appeared, Venus, brilliant and steady. Mira stopped and looked up at it, and Petros stopped beside her. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked. Mira thought about the question. Had she? She had set out to map the stars, to understand their stories. She had filled her journal with observations and reflections, with mathematics and poetry, with memory and meaning. But had she found what she was looking for? "I found more than I knew I was seeking," she said finally. "I found that the stars are mirrors. I found that darkness is necessary. I found that storms and stillness are both part of the pattern. I found that I've been running from connection out of fear of loss. I found that I'm ready to stop running." Petros nodded slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's a good map." "It's incomplete," Mira said. "The mapping never ends. But I have enough now to understand the work, to know what I'm doing and why." They resumed walking, and as they entered the town proper, Mira noticed things she had taken for granted before: the warm light spilling from windows, the sound of laughter from the tavern, the smell of cooking food, the sight of people moving through their ordinary lives. After weeks of solitude, it all seemed miraculous, almost overwhelming in its richness and complexity. "Will you sail again?" Petros asked. "Back out to the stars?" "Yes," Mira said without hesitation. "But not yet. First I need to be here, to be present, to practice what the stars taught me about connection and presence and being fully alive in the moment. And then I'll go out again. And return again. The rhythm of voyage and return, that's the pattern. That's the map I'm really making. Not of the stars themselves, but of the journey between solitude and connection, between wilderness and home, between the vast and the intimate." They reached Petros's house, where his wife stood in the doorway, smiling. "Come," she called. "Dinner is ready, and we have much to hear about your journey." Mira felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. This was what she had been missing, what she had been afraid of, this simple warmth of human connection, this being seen and welcomed, this belonging to a community that cared whether she returned or not. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for waiting for me." "We always wait," Petros said. "That's what friends do." And as Mira stepped through the doorway into the warm, light-filled house, she looked back once at the darkening sky. The first stars were appearing, those familiar points of light that had been her companions for weeks. They seemed to twinkle in approval, if stars could approve. They would be there tonight and every night, patient and eternal, waiting for her to return to her watching, her wondering, her endless mapping of meaning. But tonight, she would be with people. She would eat warm food and share stories and remember that she was not just a lone observer of the cosmos but a part of human community, a thread in the great tapestry of connection that made life meaningful. The stars had taught her to see. Now she would practice seeing the light in human faces, the constellations of connection that formed between people, the vast internal universes that existed in every person she met. The mapping continued. It would always continue. But now she understood that the map had many dimensions, many layers, and the most important ones couldn't be drawn on paper or recorded in journals. They had to be lived, moment by moment, relationship by relationship, journey by journey. The door closed behind her, shutting out the darkness but not the memory of stars, never the memory of stars. They were part of her now, woven into her understanding of herself and the world. And tomorrow, or next week, or next month, she would look up again and continue her mapping, her endless conversation with the night sky, her patient work of translation between cosmic vastness and human longing. The gift of wonder. 3 months had passed since Mira's return to Stellamar, and winter had settled over the harbor. The air was crisp and cold, the days short, the nights long and perfect for stargazing. But Mira hadn't gone out on any extended voyages since her return. Instead, she had been discovering a different kind of journey, the journey of connection, of community, of sharing what she had learned. It started with Petros's granddaughter, Elena, a girl of 12 with dark eyes that reminded Mira of her own younger self. Elena had heard stories of Mira's voyage from her grandfather and had appeared one afternoon at the dock where Mira was working on the Stella Noctis. "Teach me about the stars," Elena had said, with the direct simplicity that children possess before life teaches them to be indirect. Mira had looked at the girl, seeing in her face a hunger for knowledge, for meaning, for connection to something larger than herself. She had seen her own younger self, the girl whose grandmother had pointed out constellations on a summer night so many years ago. "Yes," Mira had said. "I will teach you." That first lesson had turned into weekly lessons, which had turned into something more, a ritual, a practice, a passing on of wisdom from one generation to the next. Every clear night, Elena would come to the harbor, and she and Mira would go out on the Stella Noctis, not to sail anywhere but simply to anchor in the harbor mouth where the town lights didn't overwhelm the sky. There, Mira would teach Elena not just the names of stars and constellations but the deeper lessons she had learned, how to truly see, how to be present, how to let memories and meanings arise naturally from patient observation. She taught her the mathematics of wonder, the poetry of darkness, the way storms and stillness were both necessary teachers. "Your grandmother taught you," Elena said one night as they sat on deck, wrapped in blankets against the winter cold, looking up at Orion climbing the eastern sky. "And now you're teaching me. So I'm part of the chain." "Yes," Mira said, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hot tea in her hands. "That's exactly right. We're all part of the chain, all the way back to the first humans who looked up and wondered what those lights were. And all the way forward too," Elena added. "To people in the future who will look up and wonder." Mira smiled. The girl understood. She had the gift, the capacity for wonder, the ability to see beyond the surface of things to the deeper patterns and meanings. But Elena wasn't the only one. Word had spread through the small community of Stellamar that Captain Mira Chen was teaching about the stars, and others had asked to join. Now, every clear Friday evening, a group gathered at the harbor, young and old, experienced sailors and complete landlubbers, anyone curious enough to spend a few hours in the cold darkness learning to see the sky with new eyes. Mira had initially been reluctant to teach groups. She worried that what she had to share was too personal, too subjective, too dependent on individual experience. But she had learned, over these months, that wonder was contagious. When one person truly saw something, really saw it, with full presence and attention, others could feel it, could be invited into that same quality of seeing. Tonight's group numbered 7 people besides Elena. There was Marcus, a retired fisherman with weathered hands and a surprisingly philosophical bent. There was Sophia and her husband Thomas, both teachers at the local school. There was young James, barely 18, who dreamed of becoming an astronaut. There was old Maria, who claimed she had lived in Stellamar for 83 years and never once really looked at the stars. And there was David, a newcomer to town, a writer who had come seeking inspiration and found it in these weekly gatherings. They sat together in the cockpit of the Stella Noctis, some on cushions, some on folded towels, all wrapped against the cold. Mira had extinguished all lights on the boat, and their eyes had adapted fully to the darkness. The stars were spectacular tonight, crisp and clear, the Milky Way visible despite being winter when it was less prominent than in summer. Tonight, Mira said, I want to talk about connection. Look up at the stars and consider this: the atoms in your body were made in stars. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, all the elements that make you alive were forged in the nuclear furnaces of stars that exploded billions of years ago. You are literally made of stardust. The universe is not something separate from you that you're observing. You are the universe observing itself. She let that sink in, watching their faces in the faint starlight. Some looked skeptical, some thoughtful, some filled with sudden wonder. But it's more than that, she continued. The light falling on your face right now traveled for years or decades or centuries to reach you. That photon from Vega, she pointed at the bright blue star descending in the west, left that star 25 years ago. It has been traveling through empty space all that time, and now it's ending its journey by entering your eye, triggering a chemical reaction in your retina, creating an electrical signal in your optic nerve, allowing you to see. You are connected to that star by an unbroken thread of light. It makes me feel small, James said, his voice quiet. All those distances, all that time. Yes, Mira agreed. But does small mean insignificant? I don't think so, Elena said thoughtfully. Something can be small and still matter. A seed is small but it contains a whole tree. Exactly, Mira said, proud of her young student. Our significance doesn't come from our size or how long we live. It comes from our consciousness, our ability to understand and appreciate what we're part of. The universe is vast and old, but it's not conscious, except in us. We are the way the universe knows itself. That's not small. That's miraculous. Old Maria spoke up, her voice wavering but clear. 83 years I've lived under these stars and never thought about them this way. I feel like I've been asleep and just woke up. It's never too late to wake up, Mira said gently. The stars have been patient. They'll continue to be patient. They sat in silence for a while, each person absorbed in their own contemplation. Mira watched them and felt a deep satisfaction. This was the work she was meant to do, not just making her own maps but helping others begin their mapping, not just finding her own connection to the cosmos but facilitating others' connections. She thought about the question Petros had asked her months ago: had she found what she was looking for? She understood now that the answer was both yes and no. She had found something, but it wasn't an endpoint. It was a practice, a way of being, a continuous unfolding that would last her whole life. David, the writer, spoke into the silence. I've been trying to capture this in words, he said. But every time I write something about the stars, it feels inadequate. How do you translate wonder into language? Mira considered the question. Maybe that's not what we're supposed to do. Maybe the point isn't to capture it but to point toward it. Language is like the finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon itself, but it can direct attention toward the moon. Our words about the stars aren't the stars, but they can help others look up and see for themselves. Is that what you're doing? David asked. Pointing? Yes, Mira said. That's exactly what I'm doing. I can't give you my experience. I can only invite you to have your own. Thomas raised a hand. Can we talk about the individual stars? I want to know their names, their stories. And so Mira began to teach, pointing out constellations, sharing the myths attached to them, explaining the science of stellar evolution. She showed them how to find the North Star using the Big Dipper. She pointed out the Andromeda Galaxy, barely visible to the naked eye, explaining that the light they were seeing had traveled 2.5 million years to reach them, that they were looking back in time to an era when early humans were just learning to make stone tools. She showed them the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, and explained that young children could usually see more stars in that cluster than adults because children's eyes gathered more light. "We lose something as we age," she said, "but we gain something too. We gain context, meaning, the ability to connect what we see to what we know." The evening wore on, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Some in the group grew quiet, absorbed in private contemplation. Others asked questions, eager to learn more. Elena sat close to Mira, soaking it all in, occasionally writing notes in a small journal she had started keeping, her own star map, Mira thought with satisfaction. Around 10 o'clock, they began to disperse, heading back to their warm homes, their comfortable beds. Each person thanked Mira before leaving, some formally, some with a quick hug, all with genuine gratitude. "Same time next week?" Marcus asked. "Same time next week," Mira confirmed. "Weather permitting." "And if the weather doesn't permit?" Sophia asked. "Then we'll meet anyway," Mira said. "I'll show you how to read the clouds, how to understand what the hidden stars are doing behind them. There's always something to learn from the sky." When everyone had gone except Elena, the girl lingered, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how. "What is it?" Mira asked gently. "I want to sail with you," Elena said in a rush. "When you go out again, out past the harbor, out to where the darkness is complete. I want to see what you saw." Mira felt her chest tighten with emotion. This was trust, this was connection, this was the passing on of something precious from one generation to the next. "You're 12, Mira said carefully. "Your grandfather would have to give permission. And your parents." "They will," Elena said with confidence. "Grandfather already said he would, if you agreed. He trusts you." Mira thought about it. The responsibility of taking a child out on the ocean was immense. But so was the opportunity, to give this young person an experience that might shape her entire life, to show her the stars from the darkness of the open sea, to teach her not just facts but wonder, not just navigation but wisdom. "Yes," Mira said. "When spring comes, when the weather is warmer and more stable, we'll go out together. Just for a few days at first. We'll see how you handle it." Elena's face lit up with pure joy. "Thank you. I promise I'll be ready. I'll learn everything I need to know. I know you will," Mira said, putting a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You have the gift. You have what's needed." After Elena left, skipping down the dock in excitement, Mira sat alone on the boat for a while longer. The harbor was quiet now, most boats dark, most people asleep. Only a few lights burned in the town above, and they were distant enough not to interfere with the view of the sky. She looked up at the stars, her old friends, her teachers, her companions through solitude and storm and stillness. They looked back at her, as they always did, with their ancient light, their patient presence. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the woman who set out alone to map the stars to the woman who now sat here, part of a community, teaching others, passing on what she had learned. She had thought the journey was about going out. But it was really about coming back. About bringing what you learned in the wilderness back to the tribe. About completing the circle. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, as she had so many times before. "For everything. For teaching me. For being patient while I learned. For giving me something worth sharing." And then, as she had done countless times before and would do countless times again, she opened her journal to a fresh page. But this time, she didn't write about what she had seen or learned. Instead, She wrote about what she hoped, what she dreamed, what she intended to continue doing for all the years that remained to her. She wrote about Elena and the journey they would take together in the spring. She wrote about the group that gathered every Friday, how each person was beginning their own mapping, their own dialogue with the night sky. She wrote about her plans to compile her journals into something coherent, perhaps a book, something that could reach beyond Stellamar to others who might be seeking what she had found. She wrote about love, not romantic love, though she was finally open to that possibility if it came, but the broader love of being connected to life, to people, to the cosmos itself. The love that comes from really seeing, really paying attention, really being present to the miraculous fact of existence. And finally, she wrote about the future she envisioned, a future where more people looked up, more people wondered, more people understood their connection to the vast universe that had given birth to them. A future where the maps she and others were making, maps of wonder, maps of meaning, maps of the human heart's response to cosmic vastness, would be recognized as valuable, as necessary, as part of what made life worth living. When she finished writing, she looked up one last time before going below to sleep. The stars were there, as they always were, as they always would be. And tomorrow they would be there again, and the day after, and all the days of her life. The mapping would continue. The wonder would continue. The conversation between human and cosmos, between consciousness and the vast unconscious forces that had created consciousness, would continue. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She was part of something infinite and eternal, a wave in an ocean that had no shore, a note in a symphony that had no end. And that, she thought as she climbed into her bunk and closed her eyes, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end.